So, good evening, everyone. My name is Sister Miriam Wagner. I am the Executive Director of the Wolf Institute. Thank you very much for joining us at this webinar that is jointly run by the Wolf Institute and the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean. I haven't done this for a while. We haven't had a webinar for a few months. We also have a select group of partners, which are too many to read out at this point. This is our very first webinar this academic year. And many of you in the audience will be very, very familiar with these webinars. But for those who are not, I'll introduce the two big host institutions. The Wolf Institute is a research institute at Cambridge. We focus on religion and society, and we combine our research with public engagement, with teaching, and with policy work. Please have a look at our website or our YouTube channels to sort of get to know a bit more about our work. And now with my other hat on, the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean was founded in 1997. It's dedicated to all aspects of the academic study of cross-cultural Mediterranean history from the 5th to the 15th century. This is also the moment when I introduce the journal. The journal, you can see a big box of the journal behind me. The journal comes as part of the subscription to the society. So when you join the society for a very, very modest fee, you will get also a sort of every 4 months a beautiful journal into your house. So please consider joining and getting the journal sent to you by post. A very quick introduction of how the webinar works. We have a Zoom webinar audience, which means that you can't see the other participants, but you will be able to ask questions later, and you can see, of course, all the speakers. We're also live streaming via Facebook. And if you want to rewatch this, or if you want to recommend it to anyone, it will be available from the Wolf Institute YouTube channel at sometime sort of soon in the future, and also from the SMM Facebook page. Our theme today, and I'm very, very excited about this, is Lost in Translations in the Medieval Mediterranean. And our chair is a very long-term collaborator of the SMM, Professor Rosaire Salicru, who will introduce the speakers very shortly. After hearing their presentations, you can type the questions that you have into the Q&A portal, which is on the bottom of the screen. Please type them into the Q&A portal rather than into the chat, because it makes it much easier for the chair to channel the questions. At 6 o'clock, relatively sharply, we will end the live streaming and the filming, but you will still be able to be in the, sort of, you can stay behind in the room with the speakers and ask a few more questions in a slightly more intimate setting. And this is now the time to hand over to the chair. Rosaire, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Miriam, for your presentation. And good morning, at least to two of our speakers from Canada and from the US. And of course, good evening also to Marta Manso, who's in Barcelona. Well, as Miriam said, the title of this panel, of these presentations, the common title is Lost in Translations, with a question mark, in the Medieval Mediterranean. Our three panelists or presentations, I will introduce them now at the beginning, so I will leave the floor to them because we don't have so much time. Our first speaker will be is Marta Manso. She's a PhD student in the frame of the project Diplomaticon, a connected history of medieval Mediterranean diplomacy, the Mamluk Sultanate, Italy, and the Crown of Aragon, 14th, 15th centuries. And in the frame of a joint PhD with the University of Liège and the University of Barcelona, she's preparing a dissertation on translators, interpreters, brokers, and their practice in the service of the diplomatic activities of the Crown of Aragon, long title, in the Mediterranean during the 14th century. Well, our second speaker is Claire Gilbert, an associate professor of early modern history at St. Louis University. And last but not least, Travis Bruce, Associate Professor in the Department of History and Classical Studies at McGill University. Claire and Travis are specialists or have dealt a long while with the topic of this panel. Then I open the floor to Marta. And
thank you, Rosé, for your presentation. And also I would like to thank all the organizers for giving me the opportunity of presenting my current research, and also to discuss it not only with the other panelists, but also with the audience. So before starting, I thank you to everybody. My presentation will deal with these diplomatic translators and interpreters in the medieval Mediterranean that are, as you can see from the title, invisible or hidden in the sources. The diplomatic contacts established between the Christian and Muslim states of the late medieval Mediterranean are largely well known in factual terms, at least for a great part of the 14th century, since they have been traditionally, they have attracted the interest of scholarship, and most of the non-documentation has been largely published from as early as the 18th century. However, research has generally focused on the results of these exchanges, specifically the existence of truces or open warfare, while neglecting crucial aspects of the processes of these diplomatic encounters, as the processes, the agents, the instruments, and the diplomatic procedures involved. This deficiency is now being addressed by the new historiographic paradigms of the new diplomatic history, the connected history, which significantly have broadened our analytical scope. I am pleased to note a corresponding shift in the scholarly attention toward these neglected dimensions, as evidenced today by the existence of this seminar, the research of my colleagues, the professors Travis Bruce and Claire Gilbert, alongside with other incipient research like the one carried out, for example, by Arianna Totone, Maria Cristina Rossi, that we heard about last week in another congress, among others. In this context, the Crown of Aragon, a composite monarchy that reigned from the 12th to the 18th centuries over territories that now include modern Spain, like Catalonia, Valencia, Aragon, the Balearic Islands, but also some territories from southern France and southern Italy, among others, present a privileged scenario for this analysis. This is true not only because of the Crown maintained regular diplomatic intercourse with the major Islamic powers of the Mediterranean, such as Granada, Morocco, Tunisia, Tlemcen, Bejaia, or Egypt, but above all, thanks to the vast amount of documentation preserved in its archives. Nevertheless, despite this documentary abundance, or maybe because of its massive volume, scholars have generally overlooked this material, or it has not been sufficiently vindicated as a primary research focus compared to other scenarios like the Italian one. In this sense, the documentary sources preserved in the archive of the Crown of Aragon are exceptional, not only because it houses, as you can see now, the largest collection of the Arabic letters, over 180 documents, but also the contemporary translations in Latin and Romance languages that have been preserved with or without their original Arabic counterparts, as well as letters originally issued in Roman languages by the Muslim chanceries, and that paradoxically have never been included among the Arabic letters, and a huge amount of Christian documents, which, although having been traditionally undervalued, have proven, and I will try to prove, to be extremely useful for unveiling the identity and activities of the agents involved. The systematic research conducting for my dissertation, for my PhD thesis, that as Rosé has stated, it's dedicated to the translating agents and the translations used in these diplomatic relations, has yielded, as you can see now in the slide, significant results. On the one hand, I have been able to expand the number of identified documents by adding these 52 documents to the ones that were previously known. But also, on the other hand, this work has allowed me to identify the translating agents that were involved in these activities, as well as to try to understand the process and the fundamental relevance of these translations for the unfolding of the diplomatic activities across the Mediterranean. However, constrained by the limits of this seminar, I will only provide a general overview of the key insights and some preliminary results of my current research. Concerning the translating agents, I've been able to identify a body of specialized personnel, currently numbering around 50 identified agents. Their specific tasks vary depending on whether the translation was carried out in an oral or written context, whether it was undertaken in the local sphere or during international diplomatic missions, or based on the duties linked to their mission. In this regard, sources reveal an incipient institutionalization on both sides of the Mediterranean, where distinct agents were selected to perform specific tasks. It is worth noting that this specialization occurs in both Islamic chanceries and in the Chancery of the Crown of Aragon. In both, we find agents responsible for the reception of international embassies, the intercession or mediation to facilitate relations between the parties, between rulers, people selected for performing embassies alongside merchants or other agents with former experience in diplomatic or commercial relations with the other. Also, people selected agents as procurators with the authority to negotiate the signing of truces, as witnesses during this signing, as mediator in conflicts, and also as translators, like written translators of the received documentation or mediators in local conflicts. For example, some translating agents that are repeatedly chosen to be part of the international embassies, as in the case of Bon David Bonsanyo, who appears in the sources, first as an Arabic scribe from 1284, then as an al-Faqih from 1285, and who took part of an embassy to Cairo in 1289, and another with the destiny in Tlemcen in 1293. Meanwhile, other agents are only linked to written translation tasks, like Vital Saporta in 1298, or Mestre Benvenís in the 14th century in 1373, or are responsible for the local reception of these international embassies, such as Salomon Bonsanyo, who was summoned to the court to receive the translator of the Mamluk ambassador in 1305. Future lines of research in this area should aim to determine the criteria that dictate the selection of these agents, even though I can tell you that it's very difficult. And in this regard, a prosopographical analysis of the agents would be highly valuable. The analysis of these identified translations, as well as the direct and indirect references appearing in the documentation, allows us to understand certain aspects of the translation process, like the ones I have highlighted here today for this presentation, in which we can see how this translation was carried out by the same person from Arabic to Catalan, and then from Aragonese to Arabic by the same Torsimany, by the same interpreter. Also, we can see in this second example that it's the first time that I find that I have been able to identify, in which we can see two people involved in the same process, one dictating the letter, the other one writing it down in Arabic. So we have been able, thanks to this work, to this research, to hint to find some of the examples of the processes that were undertaken in these translating activities. Finally, also these translations were used as documents with legal or juridical validity. And we find them included in other types of documentation, such as instructions to ambassadors, or also insert it in subsequent correspondence as valid proof for making petitions, complaints, and other diplomatic exchanges that happen after that. So in some of the examples that I brought here today, you can see how this, the validity is the most important thing that has to be ensured, so that in subsequent correspondence can be reclaimed, for example, the free of captives or the return of some merchandises. Finally, regarding the analysis of these contemporary translations and the letters issued in Romance by the chanceries of by the Islamic chanceries, I have find that even though there's a documentary silence regarding the authorship, there are hints here and there, and the analysis of both extrinsic and intrinsic characteristics of the documents make us understand, or at least have some ideas on who is behind these translations. We have seen that there's an excessive dependency on of the Arabic original, that there's some linguistic choices that give us information about who is the person translating, even though we don't know, we cannot identify who he is, but also of his origins or the place of the translation. And the same happens with these Romance letters that we find in Granada, in which the analysis show how some of these agents were trained or are from Catalan Aragonese origin, but were installed in the Granadan Chancery. So in summary, the analysis of these translations challenge traditional assumptions on who was translating or the origins of this translator. To conclude, with this presentation, I've tried to highlight the efforts from both Christian and Muslim chanceries to ensure proper communication among them, among both sides of the Mediterranean. I've tried to, show how I've identified some of the agents involved in the translation activities, and also to understand a little bit of the incipient institutional structure with these specialized positions and the functioning of the medieval chanceries. But above all, I've tried to assert the relevance of the contemporary translations and the Christian sources as the viable primary sources for the studying of these agents that were so important, though hidden, for these translating activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. And we quickly move to Claire. I think she has a presentation as well.
Very good. I do. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody see the presentation? Yes, wonderful. Yes. Marta, fabulous. I'm so excited about your dissertation and really impressed with the research that you're doing. That's really exciting. Well, first of all, thank you, Rosaire, for inviting me to be part of this session. Thank you very much to the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean and the Woolf Institute for hosting this conversation. Today, I'm going to present briefly, I hope, I'm just going to put my timer on there, a question that's been occupying me for some time, and so I thought I would ask it together with you today, which is, what do we talk about when we are talking about translation? So some of you might recognize that I'm playing here with the title of a 1980 Raymond Carver short story, which for a long time for me has been kind of a touchstone for the problems or promises of human communication, human relationships in general, and how those kind of communicative factors condition our identities, our relationships with other people. So I find it personally an apt analog to the academic problem of terminology or heuristics that we're using to understand translation in the medieval Mediterranean. So let me tell you about some of the answers that I've come up with, but I'm hoping that we will continue to talk about it. So what do we talk about when we talk about translation in the medieval Mediterranean? So I would suggest, as people in this audience will know, that we very often talk about at least 3 different kinds of translation. First, translation is a historical process. right? So this is the kind of translation that represents a kind of stadial movement, often an imaginary stadial movement, the transfer of power and knowledge from place and people to another, as in the well-known biblical motif of translatio studi or translatio imperi that emerges in the later Middle Ages across the Mediterranean. We have the translation as the product, right? So the text, or as both Rosaire and Travis have shown, and Marta, you as well, sometimes it's also an oral product or an ephemeral product. The ephemeral can be textual or oral, but it is the translation refers to that product. And then we have, as Marta also indicated, kind of new directions in this scholarship are answering the question, what's a translation? Well, perhaps rather than a historical process, it's a social process, a collaborative or negotiated process. We might shortcut that to talk about an exchange, or maybe even a social act. I've called this elsewhere, like a speech act. So this is a social act that has real consequences in the world. So these different facets of translation are certainly on display in Mediterranean memorialization of knowledge transfer, including what we still characterize as the Greco-Arabic translation movement, among others. So the translation of literary and scientific traditions, which came to underpin ideals of good governance and imperial legitimacy in both the Latin West and the Islamic West. So a few famous examples, of course, are Chrétien de Troyes and Ibn Khaldun throughout the Muqaddimah, are two emblematic examples of the long memory of that reception of Greek knowledge, of course, through different routes in Chrétien's imagination or in Ibn Khaldun's memorialization. In Iberia, we have the Andalusi writer, Said al-Andalusi, who in writing his catalog of human knowledge from 11th century Toledo is lauding the work of those Eastern translators, especially Ibn Qaffa, this famous 8th century Persian translator who is supposed to have brought Kalila wa Dimna into the Arabic tradition. And for what al-Andalusi was really impressed with Ibn Qaffa's ability to translate smoothly while remaining close to the source. So this is the first one, we have kind of the stadial translatio. In the second, we have the idea of translatio as movement and transmission, the actual product of translation. In this case, both ad sensum and ad verbum. So al-Andalusi is glad about the correctness of the transmission and the felicity of expression. And then we have, as just a final kind of canonical example, the letter of Maimonides, in the 13th century, early 13th century, Maimonides commenting to the Tibanid family of translators about how one should translate, in this case, his own Guide to the Perplexed. But he holds up Hunayn ibn Ishaq, one of the most famous Christian translators in that Greco-Arabic translation movement, as a model for how somebody should translate ad sensum. So you can kind of see here, once again, this is a focus on what the product of the translation is going to be, and this is advocating for a theory of translation that says that the meaning is more important than the form. Of course, the form should be good, but it's the meaning that we're trying to move. I will note, though, I think we already see in Maimonides here the third definition of translation, which is translation as a social act, translation as a social process. And we see it here in the part that I've underlined, where we are given to understand that it's father and son who are doing participating in the translation process. And so we can start to see the beginning of translator dynasties, which is definitely something that we see in the diplomatic and commercial settings of certainly Iberia and North Africa. So some of the same settings that Marta was just talking about. Very good. This completion of translatio as both a political and a social process through particular products, texts, for example, is something that's going to be long retained in Iberia and the Western Mediterranean. And here I just have two late examples from my own research focus from two of the most important, most famous Morisco translators, Alonso del Castillo and Ahmed ibn Qasim al-Hajari. And in both cases, we see again how there's a long-running debate about whether translation is a product or a process, and how those debates are integrated into the translator's very sense of themselves. So here in the background, you can just see a few excerpts from Castillo's translation workbook, including this sentence of Marcus Aurelius that he draws out to pay kind of special attention to say what it is that he is doing as the interpreter. And then in Al-Hajari's travel narrative, he reports about how he positions himself as a translator coming from the Sultan's court in Marrakesh. So it's this kind of sense of personal identity that I want to explore in the remaining few minutes that we have, which is a potential fourth meaning that we might want to add to that taxonomy about translation in the medieval Mediterranean, which is the translator himself or herself. So a process, a product, an exchange. What about a person? Right. So I think this is where this kind of social act of translation is taking us to those people. And this is, again, what Martha's project is exemplifying so beautifully. But I want to just explore the kind of theory of the personification of translation briefly with you. So who was the translator in medieval Iberia? So thanks to the work of many colleagues, including Rosaire, Travis, many others, Marta, you had a very similar list here, and I was enjoying noticing the matches and also the differences that we have. We have a pretty good working taxonomy of the agents of translation who brokered between tongues. And these are terms that are drawn from historical sources, either normative sources or descriptive sources. However, alongside that taxonomy, I want to pull our attention to a powerful metaphor for translation that continues to condition our own ability to understand that work and the experiences of those agents. And it almost certainly, I would argue, conditioned their understanding of their own experiences. And this is, of course, the translator, the Greek Hermes, the Roman Mercury. And I just point out a few examples here. Already in the late 6th century, Isidore of Seville is offering his readers an image of that pagan Mercury as a stand-in for speech itself. No surprise there. But I just want to highlight how Isidore says that this go-between is said to preside over commerce because the medium between dealers and buyers is speech. And yet, they say that he is also the master of trickery because speech deceives the minds of those who would listen. So once again, we have this sense of the agent as standing between two sides as being the possibility of commerce or communication, and then also this risk of trickery or the importance of trust. Also, already in Isidore, we have this sense of the interpreter as the medium between the sides, and specifically potentially the sides of the human and the divine. So we can see that linguistic translation was already theorized in the late Roman world. We know how popular Isidore's text was in the Middle Ages. We can see the image of Mercury continuing through the Alphonsine texts, amongst others, and into also amongst translators like the Tibonids. We see it also in Ibn Khaldun and many others. So here I want to suggest that we can see how a different kind of Hermeticism than the kind of occult sciences that we might often associate with that intellectual trend, a different kind of Hermeticism through which the interpreter was communication itself. And this is an idea that imbues the very idea of translation across the medieval Mediterranean. Notice here, so of course I came to this because I'm interested I have a project on lexicography right now, so I'm looking at Nebrija Covarrubias. We see how Covarrubias is translating Trujaman, that's the second entry down here, first as a corruption of Truecamanos, and only secondly as a potential loan word, which is what we think it in fact is, from Arabic. And then I just want to highlight also in the entry for interpreter, how much the 17th century lexicographer is engaged still with these Renaissance debates about the perils of ad verbum or ad sensum translation. And perhaps, I mean, I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but his example here is the Celestina, who has also become the kind of paradigmatic go-between in the Spanish literary tradition in order to cite what turns out to have been a kind of ongoing debate about a bad Italian translation of the Celestina in which the kind of nuances of a particular phrase were missed. So to conclude, I want to return to that taxonomy of translation, process, product, and exchange, and personification. It's in this last element, the person of translation, that we see encoded the elements of wisdom, fidelity, multilingualism that continue to underpin civilizational narratives of translatio and their ideological freight, even to the modern day. But I think in our recognition of how these ideas operate together, maybe thinking about translatio as a kind of semantic field rather than a unified concept, we might be able to communicate ourselves better about these processes, experiences, and people in a way that telegraphs complexity and contingency rather than a stadial transmission of static ideas. So I will leave it there, just highlighting places where I and others have been working on these topics, the Iberian Babel volume, which has an outstanding article by Roser, and some of these ideas which I've been working out in a forthcoming article that people can read if they're interested in learning more. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Claire. And we move now to Travis.
Okay. Thanks, Claire and Martha, for those excellent talks. It's always hard to go after Claire, I have to say. I did ask to go last, but man, it's a hard act to follow. So I wrote a few years ago an article that explored the ways that translators built and applied trust in performing their roles as intermediaries between Italian and North African merchants in 13th century Tunis. In the conclusion for that article, I noted that, quote, this network of merchants and translators was comprised entirely of men, and aspects of a shared Mediterranean masculinity allow these men to anticipate and respond to each other's expectations. One of the article's reviewers, I note this in the article, but one of the article's reviewers rightly noted that this point deserved fuller development. I was guilty of basically what I've come to understand afterwards of offhandedly throwing remarks about masculinity and gender into an article without really going into it. However, at the time and even since then, I found little to no literature on the interaction between Mediterranean masculinities and medieval merchant culture. This is still largely the case, although I've seen some work in preparing for this and earlier on the relationship between credit and masculinity. So one of the reasons that I accepted this talk today was to carve out a space in my work to think about how exactly we might come at this problem. So scholars have seen honor as a key aspect of Mediterranean masculinity since the 1960s, when, among others, anthropologist John Peristiani's edited volume, Honor and Shame, The Values of Mediterranean Society, established this paradigmatic model that has largely gone unquestioned since then. In his article on honor and shame, Julian Pitt Rivers notes that honor is the value of a person in his own eyes, but also in the eyes of his society. Also in that volume, Pierre Bourdieu ties honor with his theory of social capital, an idea that I've applied to translators in a couple of articles. He also equates honor with masculinity, in that maintaining and defending his honor is, quote, what a man must do in order to live up in his own eyes to a certain idea of manhood. Much of this literature centers on virility, sexual dominance, and sexual behavior. But honor and its equivalent social capital, and so also masculinity, are necessarily tied to many other aspects of a person's public persona. So how then does masculinity help us to better understand the role of translators in medieval Mediterranean society? I've argued elsewhere that honor and reputation were essential components of the translator's profession. Without them, and the trust that they allowed, translators would have been unable to perform their responsibilities. As Claire argues in her excellent book, In Good Faith, Arabic Translation and Translators in Early Modern Spain, she writes, quote, for those Arabic speakers who became translators, the greatest social and professional advantage was a reliable reputation. Claire then carries us through the various ways that translators in early modern Iberia built, maintained, exchanged, and sometimes lost reliable reputations. Although she does not apply the idea of masculinity to this process, I do think that it is also relevant. This was, after all, an exclusively masculine society, if I'm not mistaken. And the translator's honor, and thereby masculinity, was intrinsic to their reputation. A translator, in whatever role they may have played, was expected to be trustworthy. Most of my work and this talk, and Claire and Martha's work, center on diplomatic and commercial translators, but this is also applied to literary and scientific translators. So we all know about Constantine the African, one of the most well-known early medical translators in the Latin West, and his Pegtegni was widely read. However, Stephen of Antioch, a later competitor for Constantine, aggressively attacked Constantine's honor and trustworthiness, accusing him of plagiarism, rightly accusing him of plagiarism, although it's kind of anachronistic. But anyways, he writes, "He has taken away the name of the author and the title and put himself, who was the translator and also the creator of the book, and he's entitled the book with his own name." He also writes, "Therefore, he should rather be condemned who, when he translates the book of another author from one language to another, by some overconfidence or impudence, has not blushed either to take away from the author what he had labored over or to usurp that material for himself." In Stephen's eyes then, and those of his readers probably, Constantine is a fraud and a liar. And as Charles Burnett quotes in his article on this asynchronous exchange, "As we see in the deepest circles of Dante's Inferno, nothing dissolves the trust that anneals any society more than crimes of fraud and deception." Stephen, of course, does this in introducing his own translation of the same body of medical text that Constantine had used. So Stephen was then assaulting the by then dead Constantine's manliness as a translator to increase his own reputation by comparison. Bourdieu remarks in his book Masculine Domination that, quote, "Like honor, manliness must be validated by other men and certified by recognition of membership of the group of real men." This was also true for medieval translators. Translators who wished to work in North African ports, for example, were carefully vetted, as were those that are described by Claire and Martha. Massillitri notes that many treaties between Italian and North African ports stipulate the use of a dragoman in all commercial transactions, and they refer to them as a collective attached directly to the Diwan, the governmental administration that oversaw all commercial relations. So they were members of this vetted group. Claire insists in her work on early modern Iberian translators on the importance of dynastic reputations and dynasties of translators. Translator positions. I'm sorry, there is massive construction going on outside my window. Very masculine construction going on. So translator positions, especially within, I don't think that I've seen a single woman out there. But anyways, translator positions, especially within official court circumstances, were often passed from father to son or jealously guarded within the family. This reminds me of Adam Sabra's article on gender and spiritual authority in medieval Egyptian Sufi brotherhoods. As he notes, these brotherhoods became family affairs with dynastic chains of transmission that were carefully managed by the Sufi patriarchs. Fatherly, masculine dominance and direction was thus a key part of a brotherhood's spiritual authority. The same would be true for those dynasties of translators in medieval and early modern Iberia. So for the last part of this, I'm going to talk about Anselm Tormeda, perhaps one of the best-known medieval translators, largely due to his own self-serving writings in which he carefully establishes his credibility as a translator and intellectual authority on Islam over Christianity. His Tufa, or autobiography, provides an excellent window onto the importance of reputation for a translator. First, he was first trained as a Christian scholar. For those of you who don't know the story, trained as a Christian scholar before converting to Islam and emigrating to Tunis, where he became the director of the Port Authority and translator to the court. So in his autobiography, he first develops a clear path of both intellectual and spiritual formation, and he uses various peripheral characters to vouch for his own reliability, excellence, and spiritual sincerity. His description of his arrival in Tunis allows him to bring in the entire Christian community, represented by a few important figures, to vouch for his reputation before he abandons them for Islam. So he also writes that he was able to learn Arabic fluently within a year. Clearly an example of pure Mediterranean braggadocio that would only make sense in the world of Mediterranean translator masculinity. Tormenta also helps us to understand other aspects of the translator's role and performance of masculinity. Rather, it might be Tormenta. In his Tufa, Tormenta writes that he was present at this Genoese and French siege of the port of Mahdia in 1390. And in his narration of the siege, the French chronicler Froissart mentions that a particular interpreter, who shows up a few times in the interactions between the siege North Africans and the Genoese French forces. And Lubienski Bodenham has argued that this is probably our guy. So in one of the key incidents of the siege, Agadincourt, a Hafsid noble, as Froissart describes him in length, actually, decides to challenge the besiegers to individual combat. Agadincourt approaches the opposing camp, accompanied by an interpreter, perhaps our Tormenta, and in this interaction, the interpreter verifies first that the soldier who comes to meet them is of sufficient status, that is, that he has the correct level of masculinity to talk with a Hafsid noble. He asked Cifreno, the French soldier, Christian, I'm going to directly translate here. Christian, are you a noble man of name and arms? Are you worthy of responding, basically, to the person who is asking you these questions? So Tormenta then is helping to negotiate and enforce expected norms of Mediterranean aristocratic masculinity between these two people, establishing their relationship to each other in that way. More interestingly, Froissart's account also shows us, however, the liminal and even subservient place of the interpreter in this society. As I've written and others have written as well, interpreters were rarely members of the same elite societies that they served. They did not have the same status as those elites. So when Tormenta responds to Cifreno, or the interpreter responds to the French soldier, he explains why they're there and why Agadincourt is challenging him to combat. He says, so says the dragoman, here is a gentleman who belongs to us, who is asking to battle you man to man, corps à corps. Et la querelle est telle que les nôtres proposent, oh, so it is. Et la querelle est telle que les nôtres proposent et disent que notre loi est plus belle et vaut mieux que la vôtre, blah, blah, blah. And we are fighting you because our religion is better than yours. Go. Cifreno's response puts Tormenta in his place. He doesn't take issue with what he says. He takes issue with the person who is saying it. Ha! Cifreno responds, ne parle plus avant de cette manière, car à toi non appartient point de parler. You do not have the right to talk about these things. And then after that, he says, mais dis au Sarrazin qui te fait parler. Say to the Saracen who is making you talk. You are just a puppet. You are nothing to us. You are a vehicle for words, butt out. So in this, Cifreno reminds Tormenta of his place, of the fact that he is excluded from this world of noble Mediterranean masculinity. And given his braggadocio and his tufa, it's not surprising that Tormenta excluded this particular interaction and slight to his honor and reputation. So in quick conclusion, I'd like to note that this is very much a project in its early stages. But given the gap in the literature on normative masculinity, not to mention its role in understanding medieval translators, I think there's a large need for us to revisit the paradigm of honor and shame and sexuality for medieval masculinity and explore other aspects of how that honor is performed and maintained and those kinds of things. We need to, in some ways, queer this normative masculinity to tease it apart, to understand how it's constructed and negotiated in its various forms, and then continue to apply that to this world of translators. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the three of you. We have 15 minutes left, so I open not the floor, but the Q&A to the attendees. And well, till now there are not questions. See, yes. Fabien Monchet, many thanks for these great presentations for all. How do you understand your work on translation as a person, not just as a linguistic instrument, as part of a broader embodied history of knowledge? In what ways do the translator's senses and physical experience beyond the written text itself shape the practice and outcomes the translation? I would ask for, unfortunately, short answers because there's not much time left.
I'm going to leave this one to Claire because Claire has written about this way better than I would just be quoting Claire. So
Well, maybe Travis, if I forget what it is that you would have quoted, you can say it. But the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, it depends on the sources. But you know, kind of the first that comes to mind is Al-Hajari, because we have his entire narrative account of his experience traveling through France and the Low Countries, during which time he has all kinds of physical and sensorial experiences, including while he is exchanging knowledge with other male scholars or sometimes their wives and daughters. And so there we get a kind of a glimpse that reminds us that even when we don't have that kind of information, we should be thinking about the fact that it is there. So this goes back to also Marta's point about what's hidden in the sources. So what's hidden in the sources are oftentimes those experiences that are not said directly. And so I would just also maybe throw it over to Marta, because I think that your methodology about paying very close attention to language choice in the translation, you know, is there any place there where you've seen that language choice might reveal something about that sensoriality?
Not about sensoriality, but about the place of origin of the people. Yeah, I've been analyzing word by word a translation, and we've been able to see, and I say we because Rosé was also involved in this analysis, how some of these word elections were, the choice of these, the choices of these words were more connected to the origin of the person. Let me say an example very briefly. In the Arabic dar, the Arabic word for dar, for houses, in Catalan is always casa. In one of the translations we've been working about, it was, casa was translated as maison, which is more related with French language than with Catalan. And this was not the only case. I had like, I don't know, tens of words more related with French or Occitan origins than Catalan in the end of the 13th century. So that makes me think, also through this discussion, that this person, the person in charge of the translation, was someone more related to this Occitan environment than to the Catalan one from Barcelona, let's say. Also because he commits some errors, some mistakes in the people's identification. One person who is like part of the chancery in Barcelona is ignored by him, or he doesn't know who he is, so he cannot identify him. So these hints here and there make us believe that this person was from an Occitan environment and not from the Catalan one, as we could assume in the beginning. Or also we have another example in which that Rosé also studied some years ago, in which the translator feels incapable of translating. And he explores that situation and he says, okay, this is very difficult for me. This is like poetry, and it's only a diplomatic letter. This is like poetry, and the parts that have been more difficult for me are the ones in which the Sultan is talking in third person. And this is explained, it's described in the sources. You know, if this helps to understand a little bit the process. But yes, of course, I'm analyzing every single word that appears in the sources.
Yeah, I love those examples, Marta. The latter one especially reminds me of the kind of experience of Alonso del Castillo that we see looking at that whole workbook, because he also copies down texts that he has difficulties with, and so you can also see that he's grappling with what does it mean to be a translator, because at different points he has different official titles. This goes also to the question of institutionalization, but not to be able to discharge the work in the way that you want to. So yeah, that's fabulous examples.
Do you want to add something, Bruce? Travis? Sorry.
No, I just want to see that letter that Martha's talking about. That sounds amazing. So is this like he gives does he make an attempt at the translation and then he glosses it, or?
Yes. Yes, he makes an attempt. He says, okay, I'm going to summarize the content of the letter because I'm incapable of translating it correctly. And then he glosses it saying, or adds a comment saying that, honestly, I didn't add that information because Rosé already knows it. So that's why I didn't add it, but it's amazing. It's very interesting.
That is
And
amazing.
it's not the only one we have. So in some cases, we can see how he's incapable of saying so, of translating those words. Or for example, in another case, I have a lake. It's Lake Tunis or Lake Tinis, that it's not, in Catalan, it appears something like, I cannot say the proper word, but it's something like Buhaira Tinis. And we were like, okay, what does it mean? We couldn't understand what the meaning was until we read the original Arabic letter and we saw that it was the Arabic name for lake. So of course, it showed like two things, or the incapability of translating, or the how close he was to this word. Just as we in Barcelona, we say Wi-Fi and no connexió sense cables, something like this. So it shows this familiarity with the word or with the place, which can tell us a little bit more about the origin or the place of translation, for example.
Go ahead, yeah.
Rosa, I have a question, unless we have questions from the audience.
Yes, because there are not questions of
Not right now. Okay. Well, Travis, I wanted to ask you a couple of things. I'm really excited about the new project. Thinking about some of your work that you've done on the Dragomans already, on this kind of like agency relations, trust, credit. One place where we do see women, at least in the early modern period, is with these kind of family firms and basically marriage strategies as a way to reinforce those agency relations. Now, that of course depends on the sources that you have, right? And so, in the studies that I'm thinking of, which are some connected to the Mediterranean, but also like the Dutch context, we have letters in which the wife is acting as, kind of the either her husband's not available or he's away, so she has to kind of enter into the commercial correspondence. But I'm wondering if maybe in the Geniza document somewhere for the earlier period there might be some place in where we see a marital relationship, a marital strategy underpinning those agency relations. Do you send your son-in-law? Is it somebody's uncle? So that's one thing. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. And then I actually have another kind of idea that's related to what I just presented that I came across recently. And I wish I had known about it when I was writing my book, but I think it could be interesting for you also.
That's a great idea. So I don't know. I mean, one of the reasons why the Commercial Translators Project didn't go where I thought it was going to go for me was that I just didn't. There aren't any. Like they're everywhere, as like Martha says, like they're everywhere, but they're not. And so being able to get at some kind of like fine granular understanding of what's going on, we get those like in the Tunis Pisa letters, we get them in a couple of other places, but it's not there a lot. I think it's a good suggestion to look in the Geniza records. Maybe there is some kind of, even if it's not translators, there's something like, I think that there's something there. Actually, one of the few articles that I've seen that's recent on this idea of honor and credibility, or honor and masculinity, it doesn't talk about masculinity so much, but it talks about reconsidering how we define honor and the idea of credibility and credit. Like, do you pay your bill? One of the interesting parts about the article is it discusses how it can also be a question for women within society. Like, is a woman creditworthy, or does she have a reputation that allows her family to be creditworthy? And so I think it's like there's something similar going on there, as far as that. So, but yeah. Which other question?
If I may jump in,
Yes.
I have an example of the reign of Peter III, Peter the Ceremonious, in which they are thanking the intercession of the Queen Eleanor, but I don't know why yet. But it's interesting how, at least for me, for the first time, a woman appears there. And also what you mentioned, Claire, about these marriage strategies. For example, for the family of Bonsanyo, which I mentioned, they are also marrying another important family that is de la Cavalleria, and they are like continuing this saga, this dynasty. Yes.
Yeah, that's great, Marta. The one example I have that's a little analogous to Marta, so Travis, I'll just mention it so you can add it. It's later, but we have this famous figure, Gabriel Israel, who becomes, he's a Jewish Druchaman, and then he converts in the 1490s and becomes Fernando de Sosa. But I seem to recall that there is a source, he gets into a bunch of lawsuits. There is a source in which it becomes apparent that he has married the daughter of another interpreter. And so then we don't have a lot of other, and her name ends up being Isabel de Ronda or something like that. So you can see also they're kind of like, the patronage strategy they have with their conversion. But that's just one, that's maybe a thread to pull on. Yeah.
It's super interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, and that makes sense if we think of like translators as a profession, as a guild, basically, we see that same kind of behavior going on in other guilds. So why wouldn't you see it within translators as well?
Yeah.
I will say, as far as go ahead.
I was just going to say one other thing. It's like Martha's example. There's a case that I worked on in the 1560s in which one of the translators who comes back from Oran and via Morocco, and he's been negotiating with the Moroccan Sultan, but he is coming back to a regency court that is ruled by the princess. I want to say Elizabeth. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. But in any case, it's Philip's sister, Charles's daughter. So that's also a place where, as far as I kind of understand from the context, you have female agency in the form of the ruler, kind of like the example that Marta just gave, intersecting with the actions of the interpreter, which turn out to be not that successful for everybody. What the military enterprise fails, and apparently there's some disagreement between what Philip and Charles thought should have happened versus what maybe it's Juana does. So that's another.
Well, we have now another question from the audience, from Bogdan Smaragdac. Thank you very much to everyone for the great presentations. To return to terms for translators that Claire and Marta have found that and what might be hidden in the sources. Has anyone among the presenters come across women working as interpreters in transactions or as translators of works? And to Travis too, might their absence in either translation context or in text be linked to masculine ideas about trust and honor? I sometimes wonder how much sovereign women who might have led negotiations might have been left out of the historical record.
I'll just say very quickly, the one female interpreter that I saw, I think this is 1470s, is a captive woman in the Canaries who's acting as a translator. So I think they can appear, but as you say, they may be hidden in the sources. And I do kind of wonder if are aspects of kind of the regulation of sexuality, which might be a part of that. So I'm thinking again about this kind of different kind of hermeticism that I'm looking into right now, and the fact that Celestina comes in as one of the examples for Covarrubias. So that's a place where a woman broker procuress comes in, but she gets her comeuppance. She's punished for doing the work of the brokering. Everybody's punished for the work that she does as a broker. And so I do wonder if, maybe thinking about commerce really broadly and exchange, that there is a place where men and women, are contributing, but we don't talk about it when the women are doing it. And so that could be one historical explanation for what's going on with the sources.
I mean, there might be I'm thinking in the Dettini records, I forget what her name is, but Dettini's wife, who there's a volume of dozens, I don't know, there's a lot of letters where she is managing the company as well. I don't think there's any translation going on there, but it is an instance where there is a woman in a traditionally now role who is kind of managing this network and applying different strategies. Yeah, I think that might be something comparable, but I'm not really. I think you're right, Claire. I think that just basically managing sexuality and managing actually social sexual relations excludes women from a lot of the times where we're going to see these kinds of things happening. Unless they are, I think that the idea that that woman was a slave or a captive makes her safe for that setting. Because she's kind of like within this very specific box, in the same way that the Malinche or other like people in the New World are in that same circumstance.
Well, it's 7 or 6 p.m. at the UK. I think we have to close the recording, the live streaming, but I think we can extend a little bit the debate if you want.
Yes, and since Miriam had to leave a bit earlier, I would like, on behalf of both the Wolf and the SMM, to thank the organizer, Rosa, and the speakers for this very exciting session. I also would like to thank the attendees for sticking with us. As Rosa said, we will stop the recording now, but if anybody wants to stay on, ask further questions, or indeed if the speakers want to continue the discussion amongst themselves, we have a few more minutes. The video for this session will be available soon, in the next couple of weeks, I suppose, on the Wolf Institute's YouTube channel, so you'll be able to rewatch it. And before I say goodbye, I would also like to remind you that our next session is rather soon. It's on Wednesday, the 3rd of December, and that also promises to be a very interesting session. Its title is Mobility and the Cult of Relics in the Mediterranean from Late Antiquity to the Islamic Period, the Case of the Iberian Peninsula. So I hope I will see you all again there. And yes, just thank you very much, everybody, for this wonderful session.